Wonderful. We are now recording the session and live streaming on YouTube. Thank you all for joining us today. I know your Saturday's definitely been full with Seedy Saturday. I hope you all had some time to get some water or some coffee or some snacks in the between time of our last presentation. Erin Turnbull says, I'm on the leadership team of the Kirkendall Garden Club, and COVID has changed our meetings, activities, volunteer activities. I'm very interested in this presentation. For those of you just tuning in, I have launched a poll. Please let us know what brought you to today's talk, and if you've had to adapt any outdoor volunteer programs in 2020. So far, 33% of you say that you coordinate or lead volunteers. 17% or 29% now, you are a garden, farm, food program volunteer. 43 of you, no real reason, you just like to support Seedy Saturday, and we thank you for that. 71% have had to adapt an outdoor volunteer program in 20, or have not had to, but 29% have had to adapt a volunteer program. So are you okay to start now? We're going to go ahead and get started now. Thank you so much for those of you joining in with us for our last session of Seedy Saturday. It is a pleasure to have Sapphire here from McQuesten Urban Farm. Again, I'm Shayla, and I'm this year's 2021 Seedy Saturday Program Coordinator. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Sapphire Sing. Sapphire Sing is a longtime Hamiltonian that believes in the power of soil and fresh food. She has been involved with environmental sustainability action and projects for over 2 decades. For 10 years, Sing collaborated with post-secondary students, partner organization, and the arts community to produce an annual fashion art performance called Revolution and Wear, and education workshops that combine social justice, DIY culture, and waste reduction, upcycled wearable art. She has worked for the city of Hamilton, animating and programming the downtown Hamilton Farmers Market Community Kitchen as a space for hands-on food experiences, seasonal and farm-inspired special events, and community collaborations with local chefs, food and educators, small-scale food business, and nonprofit groups. When she is not at the Urban Fire, Sapphire gets to dress in period costume and grow heritage ornamental and edible plants as a demonstration gardener in the kitchen garden at Dundurn National Historic Site, which we got to see a little bit of her work in our previous presentation. She is poking around in the weird and wild organic garden at her home in the Crown Point neighborhood, where they ditched the front and back lawns for perennial and edible landscapes back in 2008. Today's presentations were made possible by the support of our sponsors, Ward A Councilor John Paul Danko, Mohawk Sustainability, Hamilton Public Library, Mount Hamilton Horticulture Society, and Fresh Start Environment. For those of you just joining in, welcome. I'd now like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, North America, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. I now present to you Sapphire Sing.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. Yeah. So thank you so much. It's pretty incredible being a part of this series and representing the McQuesten Urban Farm today. Big thanks to Green Venture and all their work. So just so you know, I might be joined at any point by my cat. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but if you see a cat jump up, I will try to get rid of him quickly. Also, I'll be reading a little bit from notes and also just chatting. So hopefully if you see me looking over, I'm just reading some notes. I'm surprisingly nervous because I love to talk normally and do presentations, but something about this new medium. So I'm doing my best. But thank you everyone for being a part of this, and thanks to for behind the scenes, Amy Bonin, who is one of my colleagues at the McQuesten Urban Farm. She's helping with the PowerPoint. She designed it for me as well. So she's not saying anything today, but I'm so thankful for her to be helping as well, do all the tech stuff so I can just talk. So I think we'll get started then. So I guess we can, move on to our first slide. Thank you. So just as a means of an introduction, some of you might already know something about the McQuesten Urban Farm, and you might not. So the farm is in Hamilton, right? Just in case you're tuning in from outside of Hamilton. We're in Hamilton, Ontario. We are sort of east central. So I think we might still be considered central Hamilton, but like on the far east corner. So the second little map there that shows you where we are in green with the little carrots, that's from Hamilton Neighborhood Action Strategy mapping. So you can see that we're sort of a neighborhood of interest in terms of community development support from the city of Hamilton. But you get a sense of where we are. We are not a huge neighborhood. We are bordered by, if you can envision within Hamilton, the Red Hill Valley on our east side, Queenston Road on our south, Parkdale to our west, and the railway tracks between Barton and Burlington Street on the north side. So that's where we are. If you've ever been to Lowe's on Barton, then you've been very close to the farm because we're just up the street near Melvin and Woodward. Just further envisioning sort of the where, we are about a 3-acre strip of property. That's sort of how the farm looks. It's this long piece. And we weave sort of along a walking path that connects what's called Oriole Crescent, a neighborhood that's predominantly community housing within McQuesten. And so there's lots of walking paths among the housing, and then it sort of converges into a central path, and we're part of or next to that path. So people walking to and from buses in the neighborhood, et cetera, going for walks, they'll often pass by the farm. So that's sort of how we're physically located within McQuesten. And also next to a building that was known as St. Helens Elementary School. So where we can see the farm from the school and see the school from the farm. It's no longer a school anymore. It's a community hub where there's all kinds of different service providers, including the farm. We have an office room, if you will, a storage space in there for programming. And we share it with the community planning team that's in that space, organizations like NOWASA. When there isn't COVID times, Boys and Girls Club are in there. There's a seniors program. There's lots of other things going on in that building, and we're part of that space on Britannia Avenue. So again, just sort of situating where we are. And generally, McQuesten is a neighborhood that's home to over 7,000 residents, and it's incredibly diverse, culturally diverse. There's lots of different languages spoken in that neighborhood. And of course, there's lots of different income levels, types of housing, et cetera. So it really is a real mixture of spaces and people within McQuesten. Next slide. Thank you. So that's the where. That's all about the where we are and what we look like. And then a little bit about the what. So again, if you're not too familiar with what we are really a grassroots project. So we fall under the umbrella of the McQuesten McQuesten Community Planning Team. So the picture on the left there is a great shot of a really important event, sort of building momentum was what it was called. It was the official ribbon cutting, if you will, for the project. And you've got some key players in there, of course, the mayor, Fred Eisenberger, but more importantly, Pat Reed, who's in the orange shirt helping to cut the ribbon, a person that is like the grandma of the project, if you will, an incredible leader in the community. Also, sort of next to the mayor is Casey, another really active community member involved in this project. And then on the other side, we got a gentleman in a blue shirt. That's Adam Watson. He's our really the project manager and manages other projects within McQuesten, but really ours is the main one. And so some really important people, but to say that the farm really came out of a community desire to find some long-term sustainable solutions to food insecurity. So that's sort of a lot of big ideas that came together through, grassroots action. People were concerned because McQuesten is identified as a food desert. So that means that the average person within McQuesten needs to travel at least 2 kilometers to get to fresh food. And so, yes, there is a 7-Eleven within the neighborhood, but that doesn't count as an access point for fresh food. So it is a food desert, and the farm was a dream of really Pat, and then it became the dream that rippled out and became a dream of other people in the neighborhood too, as a way to sort of be one of the solutions in that piece of reducing food insecurity in the community. There's a quote, and I'll say it began nearly 10 years ago, the project. The people living in McQuesten envisioned a long-term solution to food insecurity that brought the people together and partners to make that dream a reality. So really it was a lot of people and groups coming together. It didn't happen overnight. Like I said, it's been coming to the point where we are today for over really 10 years and changing, evolving every year along the way. And you can see on the other side of this slide, a sort of a long banner. There's even more to it. And it's the visioning, right? So we haven't done everything that the community visioned. The community hasn't made everything happen yet either. We're still working together to do that. But lots of pieces are in place or getting there. And so, yeah, literally every year the farm looks a little different, feels a little different, because it is still growing and changing to try to encompass all of the dreams from the community. So it's a pretty incredible dynamic space. Yeah, okay, that was a long intro. And I'm sure you might have more questions, and I'm happy to speak a little more to it. And I should say that the team today, so if you imagine all those community members and volunteers that help make the farm go and work each year and season. In addition, there are some staff. So the 2 full-time staff people are Kevin Hamilton. He is a lead farmer. So if you know of his work, he's did a presentation with Seedy Saturday as well, 20 plus years of organic farming in and around the community. Amy, of course, who I mentioned, she is our on-site manager. So that's another important full-time staff person. She has a plethora of skills, including lots of digital graphic work, promotions and marketing that really is her skill set that's unique. And then there's 2 full or part-time folks that do education and outreach. That's myself and Kelly McKinney, who you might know from Sprout Camp and lots of other projects she's been involved with. But that's our team. That's our staff team. And the rest of the work, really so much work comes together because of volunteers and community members. Okay, long introduction. Let's get to the before times. Volunteering is core to what we would do. The farm exists because of community members who pretty much have volunteered over the years and put so much care and time into this project, all the way from when it was born. But if we think about specifically, say, 2017 to 2019, because I'd say that's when myself as sort of volunteer coordinator and the rest of the team really started to pull together a more formalized volunteer program. We had, of course, a diversity of volunteers, and you've got quite a long list there. So we could engage with families. Some families had babies and toddlers that they'd bring to programming, children of all ages, right? Whether they're involved in school programming or if they were just stopping by to chat and hang out with us after school, or if they were part of a program with their parents or their grandparents. We've had obviously secondary school students, and they've come to do community hours. They've been part of bigger projects like that Building Momentum event when we sort of launched the farm. There was a lot of secondary school support through Churchill, building some of our kiosks and some sort of main features on site. Corporate groups, we rely quite heavily on like large groups coming, booking with us in advance and coming to do like a work day or a half work day. A lot of teamwork focus there. Faith groups, lots of other community groups come and visit and help. Post-secondary interns, sometimes they're doing projects that involve research in the neighborhood, and sometimes that also involves physically farming with us. So they kind of split their time depending on what their focus has been. Of course, random individuals are really important to the project, whether they're in the community or outside the community. And we've worked quite a bit in the past with Ontario Works. So there was a particular stream of programming that allowed us to sort of, it's almost like a co-op program in a way, where they knew that we existed and we had a space for people to gain work skills, and they could send us placements basically that were interested in being involved in a project like ours. And really they were quite important in terms of regular volunteers. So before COVID, these are really the kinds of folks that made up our volunteer base. Next slide. So, when I say that we had the luxury, I'm sure some of you might know, what I mean in terms of having people just sort of stop by perhaps, or really informally join in and become a volunteer. And it was sort of, over time, it's changed and evolved, of course, but we've gone over the last, say, 2 to 3 years before COVID from people literally just walking along the path, seeing somebody and starting a conversation, and then literally being brought out into the field to help us with something, to learn about something, to chat about something, maybe put in a half an hour. Sometimes we'll see them again, sometimes we wouldn't, but super informal. We just wanted to engage and make it a one-on-one experience where people felt that they could just chat with us and connect. Amy's amazing at this. Kevin's very skilled at this. So is Kelly. I don't know if that's my strength, but that's how informal it could be. And then we kind of developed a little further to narrow in certain time frames so people could drop in during time frames when we had volunteer sessions. So it's still drop in, right? So they might fill out an application. Ideally they would have, but it was pretty quick and minimal. The training really varied. Sometimes people would get my full orientation. Sometimes they would just get some quick reminders, about what to wear, drink water, make sure you have closed-toed shoes, those sort of things. And some people were, I called it grandfathered in. They'd been involved with the project for so long, they could pop by any time, be chatting with us, helping out. They didn't fill out any application. They didn't go through an orientation. They were just so familiar with the project. We took it for granted, right? So that's all part of that informality that we were able to sort of practice under in some cases before COVID, right? So before there was the need to really narrow things down. Then March came, right? We all remember last March, I would think. So things really stopped for a moment. I'd say that we did have to pause our work and obviously figure out, were we even going to be able to carry on with the growing season? We didn't know right at first, as all of us, I'm sure, were kind of wondering, any of our workplaces and such, were they going to carry on or change quite drastically? We were lucky because we were designated as agricultural work that as staff we could continue. So we didn't get set back too far early in the season, but it certainly changed all of our plans for bringing volunteers back and sort of, all of the hopes that we had for getting that help that we normally do to get the season started, some of the early spring events that we put on around community cleanups and getting children and families out, sort of jump-starting that again, because we mostly see those folks when it's warming up a little bit. So all of those things had to be canceled, and we really had to think about, how are we gonna do this with just 2 full-time staff and 2 part-time staff with varying degrees of skills, right? There's only one lead farmer that's a true organic farmer. Amy has tons of experience being on site and learning the farming over the years, and then Kelly and I, who have a mixture of experiences. So we really had to figure things out. Next slide. But gradually, I guess, maybe it was fast, but it seemed like time kind of lost all its meaning last year. But between March and May, the staff were out there farming. But in the meantime, luckily, things were changing and gears were moving around community gardening, right? So maybe you were a part of Victoria's talk earlier in the day, and you heard a bit about how, of course, the provincial government decided and the federal government decided to allow community gardens to open. And so once that decision was made last year, a resource that came out through Ontario became sort of the blueprint that we worked with in terms of building our safe procedures for volunteers. So they were one of the first ones that was sort of available to us and sent to us from the city of Hamilton to consider when we're kind of crafting our own guidelines. So that was our scan, really, was going directly to this document and then seeing if anything else existed yet, but there really wasn't too much out there for public programming. So we focused in on that one. Luckily, because we are supported by the city of Hamilton, when we drafted up our volunteer guidelines and how we were going to work with people safely on site, they vetted that document for us. So it went back and forth maybe twice, and they had great little feedbacks and suggestions that helped us feel more confident. And of course, then ultimately our volunteers, because we knew that we didn't just make it up and we're hoping for the best. The city actually, looked at the guidelines and approved that they looked as safe as it could be, according to what we knew then. Let's see, after that, we reached out to our contact list by email. Lots of people had been contacting us to ask when we might start the program, our volunteer program. We obviously didn't know, but we could tell them we were getting very close, and we could start to send out some orientation materials for them to read at home, so that not everything was happening on site. We could have them do a little reading, in their own space, ask questions if they had it, and then when they'd show up for volunteering, at least we knew they had a baseline of what the guidelines were. Let's see, we trained staff, of course, so not a huge team, but all of us got on the same page, and then we were ready to really roll it out. By June, that's when we actually had volunteers come back. And so the longer document that the city of Hamilton vetted for us, with lots of different details about how we would keep spaces safe, et cetera, had to be narrowed down so that it could be a quick orientation. And so that staff could also, manage it ourselves, right? There's only a small team. We couldn't spend half of our volunteer session going over rules or procedures. So these are the basics. What you're seeing on the screen are the ones that we narrowed it down to, so that if everybody coming on site could understand these guidelines and follow them, we could maintain a safe outdoor working space. So many of these might be pretty straightforward, especially nowadays, but just making sure we were always maintaining that distance. Designating tools for volunteers, and I'll talk a bit more about how we did that, and having people be responsible for also cleaning and sanitizing that tool when they were done with it. Garden gloves, we give them out for free. We had a donation once, so we have the liberty to give away reusable gloves, one pair to each volunteer, so that they could clean and maintain their own gloves and bring them back each time. Masks outdoors, luckily, were not mandatory. So mandatory if we're ever working near-ish to each other, or going to be working where we're going to be passing by one another. But if people were situated in separate spaces, you could remove your mask or not wear one. But we did start to ask people to have it with them, just in case they had to use the bathroom and go inside the building at all. You could not go inside the building for any reason without a mask, right? So better to be safe. And we also provided disposable masks, which I'll get to as well. Proper hygiene, of course, make sure you wash your hands before you arrive, and when you leave, you're washing your hands. Limited access to bathrooms, people just got used to that. Luckily, we weren't allowed to have a lot of access into our building, which is at St. Helens Center. It was very limited. So people were very understanding as volunteers around that rule. And of course, the basic coughing into your sleeve, you know, and then these are assuming that they aren't part of symptoms of you being sick or ill, if it's allergies, etc. You know, we were all understanding to follow those basic rules. Next slide. Brings us to the volunteer toolkit. So, so unfortunately, I didn't take pictures of the kit and our tool setup during last year. I don't know why, but I did. So these are representative of how things were laid out. So again, trying to keep it streamlined, as basic as possible. So we happen to have these really great buckets, actually from a restaurant in Hamilton that donated them to us. And so basically labeling buckets so that they could be our volunteer kits. So the image on the left, I'll start with that one. So every time we had a volunteer session, we made sure that we had one bucket with different colored clean cloths. So that's the one on the far right with like a pink cloth and a purple cloth. And then inside that bucket would be some warm soapy water, not too much, just a little bit. And that was available for volunteers to wash the handles or any parts of a tool that might be dirt, because you can't sanitize if there's physical soil or dirt on something. You have to clean it off first. So that's what that was for, and different colors, so that if you use the pink cloth and you put it back down, you know that that pink cloth was yours, right? So color coding everything as much as possible. The other thing that we had was a wastebasket, pretty basic, but if someone uses their mask and they disposable and they want to get rid of it, we had to provide a wastebasket so that at the end of the session, we could put that waste there and tie up the bag and get rid of it. So it's simple, but required. Same with any disposable gloves or paper towels, Kleenexes. It could go in the wastebasket. Some of those items, of course, go in a green bin or in the compost, but just as an example for you, just to make sure public health knew that we were disposing of things properly. And then all the other items went in an empty bucket labeled volunteer kit. And so we always had available a spray hand sanitizer, which we could refill, of course, as needed, a package of paper towels, so you could pull out one or a bunch if you need it, and those could be disposed of, disposable masks. A lot of people brought their own masks, but we always provided them just in case. And some disposable gloves. Again, very few people chose disposable gloves. But for example, if you're picking hot peppers, and people certainly did help us with that task, I encourage folks to wear disposable gloves so that they could, avoid bringing all of those spicy oils home and then touching their faces. So there was times when they were using those, but most people opted for their own reusable garden gloves, or the ones that we provided them. A little baggie of pens that says like clean or sanitized pen. So if we had a volunteer fill out a form that perhaps didn't get a chance to do it online, or if online wasn't an option for them, they could fill out the form using a sanitized pen, and then we could clean it and put it back in the baggie. And then lastly, there's a bottle there that always had freshly prepared bleach water. So that's the sanitizer. So bleach is the most affordable, really, sanitizer. There's others out there, but for us, that was one of the most affordable ones. And we can mix it up every time. So, bleach loses its effectiveness over time. So we would just mix a little in the bottom of the bottle, so not the full bottle. And then that was available for volunteers after they'd wiped their tools clean, mostly handles and such, anywhere they touched. Then they could spray, and then things would be left to air dry. So that's what went in our kit. And then we prepared and pulled that out every time. It was always there in our outdoor space. We could just pull the buckets and quickly set it up. And then that little pile of elastics is standing in for our color-coded tools. So just like we had color-coded cloths or rags, we would set out 4 sets of tools every volunteer session, and each one had a different colored elastic band around them. We tried duct tape at first, and volunteers noticed that it was very sticky and gooey and fell off right away. And so a volunteer actually in our program recommended the elastics. So we got a package of elastics, and it was really easy to replace them when they fell off or broke. And it was sort of a set of 4. Within the set, you'd have a long-handled shovel, a long-handled rake, and then a few hand tools, and they were all coated with the same color elastic band. So people knew if you picked up the yellow tools, that's what you'd be using your whole session, rather than grabbing each other's tools, and then you'd be responsible for cleaning those at the end. So that's really the complexity of our setup, because we wanted to keep it minimal and straightforward. And any forms, if there was any documents for staff to follow and use, there was a single copy. So it was inside of a binder, and that binder was a resource just for staff, right? And it would include sort of a setup list just in case people forgot what should be where or something went missing. But all of that was for us to look at. So we weren't handing out papers or sharing, clipboards with people. We did all the writing, the signing in, the signing out. The only thing someone might handle is a application form if they didn't already fill one out, and that pen, which could be sanitized. So minimal exchanging and sharing of even writing materials. Okay, next slide. Thanks. Okay, so this probably could have been a bunch of different slides, but there's lots of lessons that came out of course, last year. So these are some of the main ideas. Team buy-in was incredibly important. Again, it's not a huge team. We have a relatively small team, but I will say that when you're trying to manage a 3-acre space with kind of 2.5 people almost, like it's very few folks, not a lot of people power to go around. You can't have lengthy, complicated processes. And I'm sure people can understand, especially if you have folks that are running a program, volunteers running a program for volunteers. All the volunteers are already putting so much of their own time in. You can't have them reading documents and, spending half their day going through procedures. So having all of our team know what the basics were and consistently follow those guidelines again and again really made this work. And I know that might seem very simple, but sometimes, people have, they're in the middle of something, they don't want to stop, they have a way of doing it. And sometimes it's hard to even get somebody on board with one procedure that's new, but we had to completely all agree on those guidelines that I read, those, the basic 7 things that everybody had to abide by, and then putting out the kit, making sure all the pieces were in place. People were picking up the right tools and cleaning those tools. Like, from start to finish, our team had to be on board, and they did it. We did it, which was amazing. We waited till we were ready. So I remember a few times in the summer, poor Kevin Hamilton, inquiring like, where are the volunteers? Aren't we allowed to have them back? When are they coming? Like, who do we need to talk to make this happen? And I was like, that's me. I'm sorry. Like, I'm kind of dragging my feet on making sure everything is just right. Just to, we have all the resources. I guess I kept wondering if we were really ready, and eventually we were. We had the approval from public health. We had all the things that we said that we would have in place, and so just waiting until everyone was ready and felt that they could follow through with those basic procedures was actually worth it. Because when they did come back, volunteers were amazing. They felt safe. So it was worth it. It was worth waiting until we were ready. Even though there was work to be done, the work didn't go away. There was always still more work. So, waiting for the right moment was important. In the end, we weren't able to do groups. We still weren't able to manage having obviously groups of 10, 20, 30, up to 80 sometimes people come and volunteer with us. We had individuals that were booking to come out to a volunteer session, and they were very dedicated. We were incredibly lucky to have volunteers that, for the most part, we saw many times, sometimes every week, for the entire duration of the program. I can really say it was quality experiences and volunteers versus quantity. We couldn't do the quantity, but the quality was really there. So it was still very much worthwhile, even though we couldn't make the big groups happen weekly. We had incredible volunteers. The effort was worth it for sure. And we couldn't have done it without them. The things that we heard from people. So I thought this was important because we only did one volunteer feedback in terms of like an actual survey. Not everybody even filled it out, but we did have informal conversations as well with those who didn't. But people did say pretty consistently, actually everybody that filled it out said that they did feel safe. And so that was a huge goal for us. People wouldn't have come back if they didn't feel like it was a safe working environment. And thankfully they did feel that way. So we did something right. People did tell us, more than once that they were coming out because they wanted to just get away from a screen and be outside, right? So be outside and be doing something that sort of had them sort of energized in a different way. social without being, feeling guilty. You could be with other people, but be productive and be doing it in a safe space that was allowed, right? So we weren't just hanging out and chatting, but we were working, and people were still social and talking. We're regular humans. And so it was an opportunity to be social, even though it was weird times when you might have felt very uncomfortable being social, because you weren't supposed to be, in a personal setting. So I think it was a really important space for people to be able to do that. And of course, people learned so much about the community. So lots of folks actually volunteered from outside the McQuesten neighborhood that we had never seen before, or that just hadn't volunteered with us. And so they learned things about the neighborhood that they never knew about before. And not to mention just that building of the capacity of seeing regular faces, and then people in the neighborhood getting to know those folks. So yeah, it was a really great feedback from the volunteers and why they were there and why they were coming back. I think we might be nearing the end. Yes, so next slide. Okay, so that brings us to thanking, of course, all of our many partners from, over the years. Yeah, we really, obviously, you have an idea of some of the folks that support us financially and then through partnerships, and we couldn't do it without them either. So, happy to tell you more about those connections if you have questions. I think I'm done.
Thank you so much, Sapphire. And you just had one last question that you wanted to know. So if you volunteered outdoors in 2020, why did you do it? What motivated you to volunteer during these unprecedented times? Or even if you worked with volunteers, if you could let us know in the chat. And I have a question here from Margaret saying, how many hours a week are you expected to volunteer?
Yeah, so how we've spread it out is we have set volunteer time slots, and people sign up for one of those. So, most of those time slots are 2-hour slots, but, so no more than 2 hours. But some people came for multiple time slots in a week if we had openings. There really isn't a minimum. Some people, could only come for an hour. That's fine too. We don't really, we don't have a required sign up commitment. So there's nothing like you have to be here 2 hours a week for the next number of weeks. You just let us know. The main thing was open communication. So I'll say that when people are running late, or if they can't come to a session, or if they weren't feeling well and they thought it was better to stay at home, we're always thankful when people communicated that. They would often email us, in some cases text. Not everybody had my personal phone number, but if they did, they would text. And that was very helpful because we needed to know how many people were going to be on site, right? We were very careful about booking only a certain number of volunteers. So I'd say that there wasn't a minimum, and there still isn't, but it's 2-hour time sessions usually that we schedule, and it was just essential that people were communicating whether they could be there or not, so that we could also bring in another person potentially, and also just arrange and organize our workspaces.
Yeah, and volunteering, some volunteers, coordinating volunteers, sorry, for Green Venture too. I don't know if you found this, but at least it was my experience that people were eager to volunteer and just kind of get outdoors, right? Like there was definitely an uptake in our response.
Absolutely. I'd say again, we didn't have the groups, but the people that came, the individuals that came out were so keen for different reasons. Like I said, some of them wanted to just be outside, some of them wanted to be social. Some people have like such interesting experiences themselves, either farming or gardening, or were just there to soak up all of Kevin Hamilton's knowledge as an organic farmer, because he loves to share that information. So it's almost like an informal education every session. If you got to work near him, he'd be happy to share all of his wisdoms and experiences as an organic farmer. So yeah, people were keen, and those who came, they just kept coming, which we just couldn't thank people enough for their dedication.
Yeah, we definitely got some feedback saying that it definitely wasn't, an hour wasn't enough with Kevin to get all his knowledge. So we have in the chat from Victoria, I volunteered counting trucks for the truck route reboot, echoing Jessica, the environmental work doesn't stop. And Jessica had previously said that she continues to volunteer because we cannot pause our environmental work during pandemic times. It's more important than ever to support conservation and environmental work. So with safety measures in place, I'm super happy to continue to volunteer. And Jessica has been a wonderful volunteer with us at Green Venture, and we appreciate all the work that she continues to do with us.
Yay.
Great presentation from Patricia Reed. And
thanks, Pat. Yeah, I guess I can't say enough about keeping it as simple as possible, and just minimal, simple, and managing the number of people. And that changes, we know, with the government color codes and phases and such. We're going to be allowed to have different amounts of people out with us, but we, even when we could have more last year, we still kept it to a certain number that we all agreed as staff was manageable. And I think it really worked also for the number of tools that we had prepared and cleaned every time. We have to think about all that. So, it wasn't worth trying to be like, can we now get 20 people out here? It would have been too much, and it wouldn't have been as effective or efficient even. So less was really more.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. When we planned the tree planting that we did earlier on, we worked in shifts too, and leaving that ample time to let us have that time to disinfect and make sure that we had everything in place. So
yeah,
it's definitely useful and important information to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Hazel Cho says, very impressed with your protocol and efforts around COVID guidelines. Was there any concerns of an outbreak or someone testing positive? Would the operation be shut down?
Oh, great question. So luckily, we didn't have any scares with our volunteers. Like I said, people were actually really diligent about like, I think I have seasonal allergies, but I'm going to stay home today. I'm like, that's okay. Thank you for letting us know. We did have a scare early on with our staff in the early spring. It was literally as things came on and we got the news of everything changing in the world. One of our staff people got the flu, and we were for a moment just like, oh no, like I'm sure many people were. So luckily it paused some of our early greenhouse activities, like getting things started by maybe a week and a half or two, just self-isolation for that staff person. But that was it, because it was only staff at that point, and really it was 3 of us that were on site, not even all 4, and no volunteers. So it was a very minimal number of people, and we just self-isolated and monitored. So that was the only real scare that we had, and it was scary for sure. We were probably a little over the top fearful. I was anyways. Yeah, it was the time.
Even right? A sneeze, somebody sneezes, right, and you'll take a double look, right?
Yeah. So we did have a scare, but it was very few of us involved, not involving the volunteers yet. And so it was just communication among the 3 of us and our manager through the city. So he knew what was going on, and it didn't delay us, luckily, very long. It was about a 2-week period, but things kept going, but only 1 staff person went on site and was doing the management of the seedlings and trays while everybody else was at home self-isolating. So that's how we managed that.
Speaking of seedlings and trays, I know that you at McQuesten plant quite a few of seedlings for your seedling sale. How did it work managing those seedlings as far as watering? Was that only like keeping up with seedlings? Was that only done with staff, or did volunteers come in at a later time to do that?
Good question. Yeah, we didn't have volunteers on site until June. So our seedling sale last year, and we're having another one this year, the seedling sale had already happened. So that was just staff. It was strictly staff managing those spaces. And again, really just 2. Our greenhouses are retrofit shipping containers, amazing, beautiful spaces, but relatively narrow and small. So Amy and Kevin were basically the only 2 staff managing those. So there wasn't a 3rd, 4th person trying to get in there. Yeah, so to make it work, we just had the two, and yeah, they did all of that. This year we're actually bringing on co-op students for the first time, so they are volunteers, and we have set up additional protocols now to be able to manage them in the two greenhouses with the two staff people. So we've had to, increase, say, the number of tables that we have. So we always have 6-foot tables for each person, putting up signage that says maximum capacity or maximum number of people in each greenhouse. So these are things we already see in the community now, but we didn't have signage up before because it was only ever really Amy and Kevin going in those two buildings. So it'll be interesting to keep evolving our program to now include students of 5 days a week for about a 3-month period. But I think based on what we learned last year, we're ready. We wouldn't have been ready last year, but we're ready this year.
Yeah. And so Bonnie asked, when is your seedling sale?
That is coming up in May. So it's usually around the May 2-4 weekend that we actually do the pickup. So we did well, it wasn't contactless. It was kind of almost like a scheduled pickup. And so the catalog will be going online or launching online within the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're just finalizing the list of what we're going to offer. And it is a fundraiser for the farm. And it was really fun. We had a great time meeting community members last year, and lots of great feedback from folks who grew things and then sent us like feedback and pictures and such, especially of their little ones in their garden growing, the seedlings to adulthood and harvesting. So it's coming up. Check back on our website or our Facebook. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, max, we'll have the catalog up. Yeah.
And Amy just popped in the information to get on the list. So make sure to note that down.
Thank you, Amy.
I have another question. I know McQuesten does a weed and feed program. So what happened to the feed part of it? How did that work?
Great question too. So last year first of all, we didn't do any programming with children at all. So Weed and Feed really has been a very family focused program. So it's like a family dinner every Thursday afternoon and some kind of outdoor activity. It could be harvesting some beans or planting something, or more like a fun activity versus actual labor. So it's like light activities. So we had a Thursday afternoon volunteer time slot, but it was just for adults and it was standard hard work pretty much. And the feed part has been on hold. So we don't know this year yet if we will be able to return to a version of family dinner that might come outside and be in the form of like takeaway packaged prepared food using our own ingredients. So staff and volunteers making food, packaging them, labeling them properly, and then distributing them. These are just ideas right now. So it's according to our capacity and of course what's permitted. So I'd say the only way we distributed prepared food using farm foods was through some food banks. So Nawassa Food Bank on site, we were able to provide them frozen meals, a certain number each week, and they distribute it to families that they knew could accommodate either a single serving or a family serving. And also St. Matthew's House, they distributed some of our foods to their seniors last year. So that's how we got prepared foods out into the community through these other agencies that were already doing it and had their own sort of safe process for getting it out there. But it wasn't a family dinner situation, unfortunately. So this year it might come back. We don't know how yet, and it would be later, like maybe September. I don't know. It's still a question mark for us.
Yeah. Well, we hope that we can taste some. I had some zucchini bread. And I would love to be able to have that again. So, yeah.
Oh my God, we do. We miss having the families around, to be honest. They come and visit us and like walk the path and chat, but they can't do programming yet. We just don't feel like we have the capacity to ensure like that adults and kids are safe when we're working with them in a group. So as a result, it's just passive, like, hey, take a look at the farm and interact with stuff along the path if you want, but that's it. We can't like put you to work in a formal program yet. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Victoria Biggs just has a comment. Thank you for sharing your experiences and expertise. All of your staff are champions. Great work.
Oh, she's too nice. That's very sweet. Oh yeah, I want to say really small. This is a silly thing, but in terms of focusing what's most important, like before COVID, I would focus a lot on like proper footwear, don't interact with bugs, don't interact with dogs on the pathway. I'd say a lot of health and safety things that were more generic, like, you know, if there's a storm cloud, let's move inside. Like, these are important things to note if you're working outdoors anyways. But I scrapped all those details for the orientation during COVID. It was all about the health and safety essentials that public health had put out there. And then any of that other stuff just kind of came up in conversation in a way during their first shift. So it was a way to still talk to them about other safety things related to working outside, but still really honing in on the COVID safety required like protocols. So, for example, you know, there was a volunteer, amazing lady who always showed up in Crocs. Normally, Crocs are not okay for us because it's kind of a not a super safe gardening shoe for using tools like shovels and such. But we kind of let it go. We made sure that everybody received all the other sort of health and safety training and demonstrations on how to use tools. She never hurt herself. Nobody else got hurt. But it was one of those things where I'm not going to focus in on your Crocs. I just want to make sure that you're staying distanced, wearing your mask when you need to, washing your hands, all those other things. And she did all those things. So, you know, it was some of those things we had to like be reasonable so that we weren't, you know, making people feel like they weren't doing enough when they were trying so hard to meet all of those required protocols. So that's just a thing.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sapphire. I don't see any more questions coming in the chat. I appreciate all the knowledge and protocols you are taking to ensure that this can still carry on. Thank you everyone for tuning in today for our last Seedy Saturday virtual event. I appreciate you all being here. As a reminder, the session was recorded and will be available at a later time. And as always, I will send a follow-up email with any of information that was provided today. Thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you next year, hopefully in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you.